Buddy, I think I'm now coming up as live. There we go. Hey, I'm Nancy Scott with Masterpiece Quilting. Welcome. Going to give this just a second so we can come up. Oops, and we've got barking dogs already. Hold on. Lillian. Okay, as you know, I tape with a live studio audience here. We have three pooches in the studio with me during the day, Miss Lily, Miss Zoe, and Miss Ruby. Ruby is the corgi pup that a lot of you have seen in my videos. She has a squeaker toy. I'm hoping she doesn't start squeaking it. I've got a fly in the studio, so if you see me going like this, it's not because I'm trying to exaggerate something, it's because I've got this pesky fly that has been in our house for 3 days now. Anyway, what I am here to talk to you about. We are part of the Designers Tips and Techniques virtual show, and welcome to day number 2 of the show. Yesterday was absolutely outstanding. I know some of our folks out on the East Coast were having a little bit of challenges with the weather, but I'm here in Indiana where we can't decide if we're sunny, warm, cool, cloudy, what we are. Anyway, what I want to share with you today is talking about workflow and organization. If you're like me, we have to get a lot of projects done in a hurry with deadlines. And then somewhere in between there, I get to fit in making a project for myself. But many times I'm starting one project, then I'm shifting gears to another one, then I have to come back to the first one. And there is nothing that frustrates me more, and I'm sure you guys are the same way, than having to try to figure out where was I in this project, and then having to repeat steps or redo something that you've already done, because that can just totally suck and drain the energy out of you. So what I want to share with you today is some of the workflow techniques and some of the organizational techniques that I use in order to keep everything as streamlined as possible, to make my quilting time as efficient as possible. I'm going to go ahead and do a quick refresh over here. I've got my laptop off to the side so I can make sure that I'm broadcasting over here. There we go. And let me, hey, we got a hello from Virginia. Okay, life is good. Just wanted to make sure that what's going out my cell phone is coming back in on my laptop. One of the first things that I want to share with you is working with your patterns, and how do you work with a pattern so that you can use that pattern most efficiently. And this is something that I've done for quite a while, is to make a copy that I use while I'm making the particular quilt. So if I'm working from a magazine and I know that I want to make a specific pattern out of that magazine, then I photocopy the pages that I'm going to be working with. And then I have those pages that I can write on, that I can mark up, that I can highlight. I have those as my working copy. So if something gets spilled on those, it's no big deal because it's just a copy. Same way if it's a downloadable PDF pattern, I just print that copy. That's the one that I'm going to work on. My original is still in my computer. For a print pattern, such as this is my Block and Tackle pattern. As you can see, this is the Christmas version of the quilt. I've got the exact same quilt behind me, but in a different version. So if I was going to be making this quilt from this pattern, the first thing that I would do is to have the photocopy of it, not necessarily my original. And then I would go through and I would change and just literally write on here that instead of using beige fabric in a certain area here, I'm going to change that to salmon and just write that on the pattern. And wherever it talks about beige fabric, I'm going to write salmon. So I know that I'm using that particular one. The stripe stays as the stripe. The sashing, instead of being green, now is going to be blue. So I would just write that in the pattern. And then that pattern becomes my complete guide, and I don't have to stop and rethink, oh wait, did I change that? Let's see, in this picture it was blue, but I'm using green. Or was it the other way around? It was green and I'm using blue. All of that level of confusion is gone if you write it down. many times I'm working on patterns that I've designed myself. So I wrote my instructions out, I've printed them, and then in the process of making the sample quilt, that's when I do my tech editing and make sure that everything is correct and that it works. And that was what I was working on, and I'm working on with this project that we're going to be kind of talking through here today. Now, a lot of you may already be thinking, wait a minute, she copied the pattern. Isn't that a violation of the copyright because we're not supposed to copy the pattern? Real brief on that. If you copy the pattern, make a physical copy of it, and you're using it yourself, that is okay. If you make a copy of the pattern and you turn around and you give it to all of your best friends so that they don't go buy their own copy, that's a no-no. If you copy the pattern and then turn around and start selling it to other people, no, that's a no-no too. But copying it for you to use for yourself, that's perfectly fine. So if you've bought the magazine, you've bought the book, and you just want to make a working copy on your copy machine, that's perfectly fine. So that was my first tip, is to make the copy of that pattern. Go ahead and mark it up, make it specific for you. A little bit about tools. And I don't want to get too much into organization of, everybody's studio because everybody works differently. But I have one of the little just desk caddies that I picked up at the dollar store. Nothing super fancy. Obviously it spins around, but I've got my scissors here. I've got a seam ripper, because we all know if you have a seam ripper nearby, you're not going to need a seam ripper. But as soon as you need a seam ripper, you don't find one. Other little sewing gadgets. But most importantly out of here, I've got 3 things that I use pretty much on every pattern that I'm working on. I like Sharpies or permanent markers. They're not smearing like an ink pen does. Something that I can write with. I like some colored pen. This just happens to be green. I normally pick them up in the multicolored packs when the back to school stuff has gone on sale. And then a highlighter. So as I'm working through a pattern, once I have cut something, then I highlight that I have cut that particular piece. And as I share a little bit more about my workflow, this is going to make some more sense to you, because I don't cut in the order that it is presented by the publisher, whether that be the designer or a magazine publisher. I cut in my own order, and I'll share a little bit more about that here in a minute. So I have these guys down pat, or right here, real close by, that I can grab at all times. See if I can get them back in there. Other things that I have, Post-it notes, sticky notes. They don't necessarily have to be sticky ones, just scrap pieces of paper, but something that you can write a note on. I found that sticky notes never stick to fabric very long. So I'm basically pinning them to secure, but some sort of sticky note. Wonder clips. So some type of little clip. I like the little ones, but I've got hidden up here. Just good old-fashioned clothespins work really good too, especially if you've got a pretty thick layer of fabric that you want to hold on to. So I normally have a bag of clothespins pretty much close by. And then also pins. And I have several pin cushions like this, just filled with pins. One next to the sewing machine, one on the cutting table, one on the ironing station. Pins all over the place. Now, as far as physical organization, I keep my projects in either a basket or a tote. And this is basically any project that I'm starting on, there's either a basket or a tote for it. If it's something that I know I'm not going to finish right away, it's kind of a work in progress project, it normally goes in a tote with a lid. This is an applique project that I've started many, many moons ago, but you can see in here we've got the applique pattern, I've got all the fabrics that I'm using, and then I've got the actual top down in there. And the reason I go with, I think they call them shoebox totes, but they're see-through so you can kind of see what's in them. And then they've got lids and you can stack them accordingly. Send him out. If it's a project that I'm working on and I know that it has a deadline and I'm going to be finishing it up pretty soon, I just go for a basket. It gives us an excuse to buy more baskets. But whether it be Longaberger, whatever, some type of basket. And in it, I have everything that I'm working with on that project. I'm going to try to flip this up a little bit here so you can see it. The extra fabric from the project is in here. Applique templates. And I work from reverse normally when I'm working with a project. I've already prepped my backing. So it's already in here seamed. It's in the bottom of the tote. And I said I work backwards. So the first thing that I typically cut on a project is the binding. And then I go ahead and I seam and label that binding. So if I find, I've got it labeled as binding, Post-it note pinned on there. But if I find a bunch of strips that are seamed together diagonally, I know that's the binding. And I had a couple times where I've lost binding for quilts because I didn't do the binding right away and then the fabric got cut up into something else. So I tend to do that first. That way when I need the binding, it is ready to go. As I'm working through my cutting instructions, and I know I want to stay close to 15 minutes here, so I'm going to speed up just a little bit. Cutting instructions, I start with my binding first, cut it. Lots of times I'll go ahead, seam it, tuck it in my tote. I know it's done. Next, in a particular color of fabric, I cut my largest strips first, which typically are going to be your border strips. Again, working backwards, but I cut those first because if I'm going to make a mistake, then I still can have enough fabric to cut all the border strips and then use the miscut fabric for the smaller pieces. As I'm cutting, I like to use this rack. Let's see if I can scoot it over a little bit more. And I hang my cut pieces onto it. That way I know that they're not going to get wrinkled. They're not going to get messed up into anything. These happen to be all the same sizes, so I haven't labeled them, but I'm just going to cut them and hang them over that. When I'm cutting smaller pieces, lots of times I'll go into Ziploc bags or some sort of a sealed bag. And I have a little fabric tote. Whenever I get plastic bags, I just tuck them in here and reuse them over and over again. Whether they be pattern bags, ones that fabric has been shipped in, they're just in here, not really in order, but if I need a big bag for blocks, small bags, whatever, I've got these on my shelf and they're handy for me to grab and go with. So that's how I do my cutting, is I work backwards and then I just hang my pieces over here so that when I need them, I can grab them and go with them. When we're talking about assembly, I do a lot of batch working. So the first pieces that I put together would be with step number 1. So 3 sets of strip sets. I haven't pressed these yet. I'm going to do all my sewing first, and then I'm going to come back and do my pressing and then my subcutting. But I've labeled them that they're step 1, and I've got those together. And I'm just going to hang them back over here so that way they're organized. On this particular pattern, step 2 is going to be putting together some other strip sets. And what I'll do is grab what I need. And as I'm prepping, they're going to be sewn in the order of purple, green, and purple. I will pull those together, pin them, and then also label them as step number 2. And the tags are going to stay with these particular pieces of fabric until I'm finished. So they're going to be labeled. I'm going to go to the sewing machine with them, take the label off, sew them, re-tag them When they go to the pressing station, then the same thing. Tag will come off, I'll press them, tag goes back on. That way, if I get interrupted, if I need to switch projects and go to something else, it's really easy for me to know exactly where I'm at in this project, what I've got done and what I haven't got done. As I'm making the project, on my instructions, if I finish step 1, I either highlight the number, put a big check by it, something that lets me see that I'm done with step 1. And I tend to bounce around as I'm doing my steps. Very rarely, well, more like never, do I start with step 1 and go in order through step 15 or whatever, because I've already told you I prepared my binding to start with. But I like to do things in batch work, so that way when I'm sewing, I'm sewing, when I'm pressing, when I'm cutting, and then working that way. So I may do all of my strip sets first for the entire quilt. I make all of the applique blocks first. Or if I'm sewing in the evening, I've got a half an hour to come down and work on a project, I don't want to do applique at 9 o'clock at night. That requires too much mental effort for me. I need to do applique in the morning when I'm bright and when I'm fresh. So what I'll do is I'll just leave that section of the quilt until later, but then I'll go through and do the other sections that I know I can do energy-wise at that particular time. So we are running out of time, and I thank you all very much for joining me and sticking with me a couple extra hours, or a couple extra minutes. I know we want to keep these right at 15 minutes. I hope some of my tips have helped you in understanding workflow, organization, ways that you can speed up and become a little bit more efficient with your quilting, or to eliminate some frustration, so that way you're not going, wait a minute, did I do this step? Didn't I do this step? Where am I in this project? Or help, I have lost part of my projects, or I have 2 projects merged together, which is always a little scary, but I've been there and I've done that. Hey, thank you guys so much for being a part of the Designer Tips and Techniques virtual show. I know as designers, we all love doing this, and we want to thank you for joining us today. And again, I'm Nancy Scott with Masterpiece Quilting. I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.